Okay, so we left off talking a little bit about resolution. Now we're going to skip over to bit depth and color mode. So bit depth refers to the number of shades or colors in a digital image. A bitonal bit depth is, as you might imagine, two colors. 2-bit bit depth is four colors, and so on. A grayscale is 8-bit, which gives you 256 colors, and 24-bit is a color, a three-channel color, and that gives you 16.7 million colors to work with. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about bit depth and color mode. So just like with resolution, what you choose is going to depend on what your project is and what level of quality you need compared to the level of digital storage space that you want to take up. So in this example from the University of Wisconsin Digital Collections, you can see that the most authentic rendering is coming from the 24-bit color at 300 ppi over here on the left side. And if for your project, whatever the digitization project is that you're working on, if the fully authentic rendering is what's important, like in this example, you can see the fold in the newspaper, the artwork is super clear, the edges of the paper are really clear, the fact that it's kind of yellowed, you can tell. Those are things that all get captured when you use the most color available, but it also takes up almost 50 megabytes of space. And that's just for one page. By contrast, if you use a grayscale here, also at 300 ppi, slightly less authentic rendering, only takes up 16 and a half megabytes. You can still see the artwork really well. You can still see the text. You could likely OCR this text without too much trouble, to make it readable and searchable. But let's say all you really needed was to be able to see the text, especially if you're going to send this to a researcher or you're going to analyze just the text for maybe a digital humanities project or something. Sorry, that was my cat stepping on the keyboard. Um, so if all you really need is the text and you don't need the artwork, you could scan it as a bitonal, maybe at a particularly high resolution if you needed it, but that would take up only 8 megabytes, between 8 and 9 megabytes. So just like everything else, it's going to depend what the goal of your project is and who's looking at these things, and how much space you want to take up. So this all comes together in, putting this into your scanner settings. And what we have pictured here is an Epson scanner window. And this is a few years old, so they may have changed some of the settings in recent years, but it's going to be mostly the same. So putting it all together might look something like this. You could be choosing, some kind of grayscale, 8-bit grayscale in this case, with a resolution of 500 ppi, because that's what gives the dimension of over 3,000 pixels on the long side of the image. So if you look down here on the right, you can see where those dimensional measurements are. So what happens is that you change the resolution and the dimensions down here change, and then vice versa. You can go back and forth to get the resolution that you're interested in. The other thing to point out is that we uncheck any of these automatic settings, unsharp mask, any auto cropping settings. You want to make sure that you have as much control over the scan as possible, and you turn off some of those auto settings. But again, I encourage you to try this out on your own scanner and see what the difference is between the auto settings and the you control the settings. So, knowing what qualities and features you're going to need for your project will inform what type of equipment you're looking to buy or borrow, or if you decide to prefer, that you prefer to outsource this project. And there's more information about this in the toolkit, but a couple of things to keep in mind when you're choosing a scanner. Most entry level flatbed scanners accommodate items up to 8 inches by 10 inches. If you have oversized items, you might need to invest in a slightly larger scanner, explore a copy stand and camera setup, or work with a partner or vendor to scan any larger items. If you have a large number of film negatives or 35 millimeter negatives to digitize, consider a flatbed scanner with film or slide trays or a dedicated slide scanner. I think the quality is probably better on a flatbed scanner with film and negative trays. Not all consumer grade scanners can capture TIFF files, so be sure yours does. And I definitely recommend not using the scanning wands or scanning apps on your phone. Those are really great for researchers who just need to get a quick reference image, but it won't give you super high quality results. And then I don't recommend using a sheet fed scanner like the top of printers or the automatic scanners for any archival materials, unless what you really have is a stack of printed paper, because it can damage originals. So, all of this, of course, depends on your budget for your equipment, but it is definitely possible to get a great scanner to do everything you need it to do for less than $1,000 and sometimes a lot less. I tend to recommend Epson scanners because they are just continue to be the best scanners for archival materials. And the basic ones can run like $250 to $350 for really good basic work. There's also overhead book scanners available for around 250 bucks, so a lot less than you might think. If you don't want to make a long-term investment in equipment, consider borrowing a scanner or maybe a digitization kit. If several of you are in public libraries already that has digitization equipment, but if you're not, check with your local public library to see if they have digitization equipment that you can use either on site or borrow through the library. Um, Check also with, historical societies and other cultural organizations. I, of course, can't speak for everybody, but lots of folks I know would be happy to let their equipment be used in their organization for a digitization project. And then the last thing to mention is just that, if you have something like large maps, books with fragile bindings, or analog audio or video that you don't feel comfortable with, consider outsourcing this to a vendor, which does cost money, but sometimes it's worth it to save the quality of your materials. Um, the last thing I'm just going to say on this is that the toolkit has some information about personal digital archiving labs, especially the DC Library Memory Lab network. So check out those maps to see if there's labs near you that you could use if needed. Okay, quality control. So as you digitize, of course, we want to make sure that we're reviewing our digital files on a regular basis. The goal of regular quality control is to ensure that you're creating faithful digital copies of original materials and that the digital files are being created according to the standards that you determined at the start of your project. This step is especially important when working with volunteers or vendors, this quality control step. Basic quality control for digitized images and documents includes confirming that the file can be opened, the file name is correct, the image is not rotated or backwards, it's not skewed or off-centered, and that there's no other, unwanted materials like dust or hair in the image. The first round of quality control should be done by the digitizer, you, after you complete a batch. And then the second round of quality control should be performed at least weekly by a separate individual. And that can be somebody in your organization or somebody else in your family or a friend that you recruit to help you look through these things. It doesn't, if you don't have a separate individual to look through them, it's not the end of the world, but it's a best practice in quality control. So, if you're, keeping documentation of things like a collection log, which are mentioned in the toolkit, you can add columns to your collection log to track who is doing what part of digitization, when the scanning was completed, and so on. We're going to talk more about those kinds of collection logs and spreadsheets in the coming weeks. And then you want to write quality control into your workflow too. For the most part, if especially if these are happening in organizations, we really recommend that you go through the whole process, several times, making notes along the way of what works and what doesn't work. And then once you feel like you have a good system down with your settings and preparations and steps, I recommend documenting the entire thing. So as you write it out, imagine that you're training a new person on how to follow in your footsteps, which might be exactly why you're documenting a digitization workflow. And there's an appendix in the toolkit. I think it's Appendix G, I think, in the toolkit that gives you some tips on how to write effective documentation. You don't have to write out the entire workflow for me for this class. Just give it your best try for now. But if you're doing this project for real in the future, I recommend taking a look at the documentation appendix. Okay, so that's it for this week. You have a discussion and a response due for this week, and then another worksheet on digitization procedures for your project. As always, keep in touch and let me know if I can help with anything.